Podcast Day. It's Podcast Day. Welcome in, friends. Welcome in, one and all. My name is Marceline, and you are welcome here to the heyBrownBerry YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me in my little corner of the internets. We are here in my craft room once again, getting ready to share a bit about my making journey. How are you? How has your week been? I've had a decent week. Work-wise, things are on steady state, I would say. Personally, really good. Maybe this episode, for the first time in a long time, I'll share a little life update. But I also want to share some of what I have been putting these hands to. So we'll talk about some spinning and some knitting. Let's get started. So I have a project update that I want to share with you, and this is a bit of a different project update. It is one sock, and I am about to tell you all about this sock project and what I loved about it, but it's not going to become a pair, which is very unusual for me and for many a sock knitter. Usually our aim is to make two. So first let me talk about what I love. This is a combination of my pattern and parts of a pattern by Denise, who is Earth Tones Girl out here on YouTube and on Instagram. And it's also a sock pattern that I knit with a custom yarn colorway that Denise had made by the dyer at Woolens and Nosh. I'll put the information about it here, but I will tell you that it was a limited edition and is no longer available. But I started with the idea that I would take one of my sock patterns that has a texture, and then I would use the Shadow Wrap heel from Denise's Sock Exploration Shadow Wrap heel pattern. And it worked out beautifully, as you can see. The colors are slightly blown out because my window is right there, but you get the idea. It's a beautiful striped sock yarn, self-striping, and I combined it with a simple gray wool yarn, and I knit it cuff down, which is different than what is in my pattern for this sock. And it was kind of like an experiment. It was really knitting for the sake of trying out an idea. Could I knit a pattern that I had written toe up, knit it top down, and find the right heel to work with a self-striping yarn and a textured pattern? This staggered rib pattern is made by using two yarns, one color on each row, and you alternate a ribbing pattern that gives you this kind of a small honeycomb look. And then I wanted the perfect heel to not disrupt the pattern or the stripes in the yarn. Mission accomplished. So why will this not become a pair? Well, the truth of it is that this colorway is just not for me. I am more and more lately falling in love with natural, neutral colors, solids. I've made projects before with stripes. I've made projects with scraps. I've made multicolored projects of all kinds. And I'm just finding that I love lately a solid tone. I'm spinning with fibers that are versions of charcoal gray, chocolate brown, beige, cream, tan, very neutral. And I've made my last few garments in a single color. And I realized that although I love how this yarn worked out, and this heel, magic, excellent fit. I even love how the self-striping yarn worked out so that there was one color on each half of the heel. But when I thought about whether or not I would reach for this and wear it, I realized that it's not really for me now. I knit it for my foot size because I wasn't convinced of this as I was doing the project. I was thinking about it. And I said, let me just knit it for me. I wear a US women's 10.5. This is not a common foot size. So even if I were to continue the project and make the second sock, there aren't a lot of people that I know that I could gift it to and have it fit. I could give it away to charity, but that would mean spending time knitting a second sock when I already know that I have gotten everything I wanted to out of this gorgeous yarn and this knitting experience. And I proved a hypothesis that I came up with for myself. And I can repeat that with another yarn, 2 solids, 2 neutrals, same magical heel, and get some joy out of it and make it for myself. So that's what's going to happen to these. Have you ever rerouted a project like that? Do you feel some guilt around it? Does it take you a long time, like it did for me, to come to the conclusion that I don't actually have to continue with this as planned? In some cases, that results in a work in progress that just kind of languishes maybe in a box or a basket somewhere or gets tucked away. But for me, I would like to frog that sock, recover the beautiful yarn, and either use it for something else and gift it, or gift the yarn to someone who I know will love it. I haven't decided yet, but I just know that I'm going to reroute that energy to somewhere else and keep the part that I loved, which was working with the yarn, knitting up the sock pattern, and giving space to my idea. I hope that that can be something that will work for you too. Right now, if you're struggling with a decision about whether or not to let go of a project in some way, maybe this will be a little spark to help you along that path. Hello, I'm back again. Different day, different hair. I would love to share with you some spinning in progress. I have really been sinking back into spinning this year. If you've been here before, you've heard me go on and on about normalizing long-term making. And spinning as a craft is sort of naturally a long-term effort. I mean, yes, there are folks who can spin very fast and in large quantities, but for the majority of us who turn fiber into yarn, it takes a while, and that's part of why I love it, actually. There's a lot of motion that goes into adding twist to fiber, and a lot of thought. Although you could just spin for the vibes, which I do sometimes as well. But creating the yarn that you're after takes time. And just getting to know a fiber and figuring out how it wants to be spun takes its own time. And then there is the finishing process once you've made some hand spun. So washing it up, thwacking it. Some people weight their yarns. Letting it dry, all of those things take time before you get to the skein of yarn part. But then you have some gorgeous, lively hand spun to work with. I have been playing around with some Dorset and pulled Dorset, which is newish to me fiber. With some lighting adjustment, I think you can see the colors pretty well. These are from a 200-gram sampler bag that I got from Skagit Woolen Works, and it has the 2 types of Dorset in it in different shades. So I have finished half and I'm ready to spin the next half. I'll show you what's on the bobbins. Here is one of the lovely gray fiber bumps. It's 50 grams, and this has been spun up long draw, so it's a woolen spun. So this is from this fiber. You can see how the roving is nice and lofty and airy. And this yummy bobbin is one of the bumps of cream fiber. This one has a bit more yellow cream color to it than this, which is closer to a bright white. So 4 really gorgeous shades within the pack. Lots of ways to potentially use these. Now, I haven't quite decided how I'm going to apply them. Whether or not I will use them together, I think so. I generally have in mind that some kind of smallish color work project would be beautiful to have all 4 included. And I also am really tempted to do a chain ply. I love a chain ply. To get 3-plied yarns out of them. That's going to reduce my overall yardage and maybe reduce my project options to use all of them. But when I say reduce, that's not necessarily bad. I could do a colorwork hat with all of them. That would be a great way to use it up. Maybe a technique like working the hat top down so that I literally use every yard. One of my favorite, most satisfying things to do with yarn is to use it all up and have no leftovers. Yeah, what would you do if it was you? With 4 lovely bumps and about 200 grams of hand spun. I'd love to hear your ideas. By the time I finish spinning these up, I might use one of your ideas. If you have any pattern suggestions for a hat, or maybe some colorwork mitts, or even socks. Now, what I've learned about Dorset from my Fleece and Fiber source book is that it is one of the down breeds, and they are known for resisting felting. So that would make a pair of socks that would be machine washable, or at least hand washable very easily. Felting can be good on socks if it's kind of intentional to strengthen and give durability to the high wear areas. But that kind of felting from wear is not bad. Felting so as to shrink the sock after you've made it, not great. So down breeds have shown themselves to be really good for that. And anytime I've mentioned Dorset to other spinners, that's one of the first things that comes up. Like I said, I've had a really good spinning year. I felt like a real participant in Tour de Fleece earlier this year, and I have this sweater project that I'm working on. You can see over there 3 more bumps of fiber of my Narcissus fleece ready to go on the wheel before too long. That will make 6 skeins when that's done, and close to 2,000 yards. Should be enough. I am determined to make a sweater for my husband, which I've talked about in previous podcast episodes. It will be from this classic knitting pattern book, and he has chosen the V-neck option, which I'm excited to knit because it should be a very straightforward knit. It's going to be a comforting project. It will be perfect for a trip that we have planned late in the year where sweaters will be mandatory. So I want to have all the yarn I could possibly need and not have to stop mid-project, or not have to stop with the project almost complete to spin more yarn. So the goal is 6 skeins and dive in to the project. Wish me luck. Greetings, friends. I am recording this segment and I want you to know that I am sticking it into the podcast, not having gone back to check on what I've spoken about before you see this segment. So if it seems a little bit stuck in, it is. There's just something else I wanted to share with you about my making lately, and also to mark for myself. Part of the reason why I bother to turn this camera on and come out here to the YouTubes is to mark my making, not just milestones, not just finished objects. I just want to keep a record of the things that I put my hands to that are bringing me joy at a given time. And I kind of remarked to a friend recently that I feel like I'm in a spinning era, a wool spinning era. Since early in the year, I have found and made more time to be at my spinning wheel. And I just really want to dive back into that part of my stash. If you're like me, your stash is very giving and very generous. And I keep wanting to try out these fibers that I have kept in my collection for a while. And I found that this year, one of the things that got me over the hump of thinking, if I start spinning a yarn, I need to have a project associated to it, was reminding myself that I truly believe a handspun skein is its own finished object. I really believe that because a lot of time goes into it. And as I get better at spinning, a lot of thought goes into how to spin that fiber, how to ply the yarn, even how to finish it. And that's a whole process. So I'm leaning into that. And then because, as I have said or will say at some point in this podcast, I'm also starting to find my color preference and the shades that I like. A lot of my fiber stash is natural, neutral colors, undyed fibers that represent, the original wool. And that is also helping me not to be too concerned about how I will use the yarn, because neutral colors go really well together in a project, in my experience. So I opened up a package of Dorset fibers, and I managed to spin up a couple of skeins. I've kind of been accumulating my hand spun into this little handmade basket that I sewed. Did I make this? Oh, it's so weird. I can't remember if I made this. I'm pretty sure I did make this. The reason I'm hesitating is because a friend of mine, Carrie Lynn, who is an excellent sewist and quilter, we had a gathering together where she taught us how to sew really cool bags like this. I'm pretty sure this was made for me, but I've made something like it thanks to some skill sharing from a friend. The memory is going. Anyway, this is where I'm keeping some of my recent hand spun skeins, including the Dorset fiber I spun. This is new to me. I've had fibers where there was a Dorset part of the blend, but this is Dorset and pole Dorset by themselves. I'm recording early morning with my extra light, so the colors they're close. They're not perfect. I will try to remember to insert a picture to show you these skeins in natural light. Really loved spinning these. Another part of my spinning era is to dig into my own skill development. So these two fibers are both, roving, milled by Skagit Woolen Works, but one of them, the chocolatey gray, is more open and airy. And when I sat down to the wheel and spun it, I felt like it just wanted to be spun long draw. This Dorset fiber holds together beautifully. It's really easy to draft. It doesn't pull apart. too easily. So long draw spinning, which is a woolen method of spinning, kind of needs a fiber that's grippy and wants to be together so that you can just make long drafting motions and keep some of the air in that fiber. And that worked out really well for this skein. Plying it up, I wanted as many yards of this as possible, so I went with a 2-ply. This color wanted more of a worsted spin, so it was also really easy to draft, but it was a little, it's hard to describe, but the point is feeling the fiber and kind of allowing it to tell me how it wanted to be spun made it so that the lighter color was spun, I'll call it semi-worsted, so a little less air left in the fiber, a little crisper spin, a little bit of a tighter ply, and that just felt like what it needed. Also went for a 2-ply on this one. Now the beautiful thing is what you saw me spinning on the wheel is part of this 4-pack Dorset sampler. That's the lighter white color, this fiber. Lots of light in here this morning. But you can see how all of these would go really nicely together in a project, right? Gotta love those natural neutrals. I'm excited to finish up the second set of 2 skeins. I think I'll do the same thing and make them a 2-ply. And it's quite possible that all 4 of them will end up in a project together, or that they will each be some kind of a feature in another project. If I imagine something like a naturally colored vest or a cowl or even a hat, where one of these skeins would feature as a color within another background, I get really excited about the thought of that. And so I wanted to share it with you. And on the subject of handspun, another thing I'm leaning into is using yarns I've already spun. Or using handspun yarns I've received from a friend, which is what I'm about to show you, but just celebrating handspun in general. That's the point. Mina Phillip and I did a swap a long time back, and Mina is the knitting expat online. Mina had a set of hippie strings, I think it's hippie strings fibers that she spun up and then gifted me the handspun. It's this beautiful gray mixed with a lot of other colors kind of splashed in between. And I'm working on a project that I hope to share with you not too long from now as a pattern. What, Mars, you still write patterns? Turns out I do. I finally dug into this yarn. I'll insert a picture of the yarn after I caked it up and before I started knitting it. And when Mina had gifted this to me, I also had been doing some dyeing. I had gotten some yarns from a company called Nomad, and I was dyeing those yarns. And I found that what Mina had spun and what I had dyed were 2 skeins that went really well together, oddly enough. Gray background, splashes of color. So this is my hand-dyed, commercially milled yarn and this hand spun, which are now being put together in this project. I'm not going to say too much about it yet because I want to give anyone who wants to knit this the gift of a pattern that they can work on, but just look at the colors together. So a bit of the hand spun part of it and a bit of the hand dyed part of it. I love these all together. And what I especially love is how beautifully handspun knits up. It never ceases to amaze me. It doesn't matter how thick and thin a handspun yarn might be. With the texture like garter stitch especially, all of that evens out and it just becomes a gorgeous fabric. And super squishy. Maybe the camera is picking up the sound of some heavy rain. We have just recently had Hurricane Helene pass by. So I'm in South Florida. It is hurricane season from June to November. We watch the skies for hurricanes, and Hurricane Helene just passed through the Gulf Coast, which is on the west side of the state. I'm on the east side. And this is the part that we get. Big rain bands and heavy winds. I'm very grateful because some other folks are having a very rough time right now. So I'm grateful we're just getting rain. Hurricane season also signals that cooler temperatures are coming. Real fall will arrive here right about December. So I'm getting ready with my handmaids. So friends, wherever this ends up in the podcast, I hope you're enjoying it so far and that you are finding some seasonal makes that are bringing you joy. The last thing I want to share with you in this short catch-up episode is I recently took out a couple of books from our local library. Huge library fan. I hope you support your local. And they were knitting reference books, I would call them. I have so many books and magazines on my shelf over there, and the ones that I use the most often are the ones that have technique information, tips and tricks, things that can be applied to many different projects. So I tend to use reference books more often than pattern books or pattern magazines. I actually just cleared out a bunch of magazines from the way back the other day, and I'm really focusing on books that just give and give by way of what's in them. So I had taken these books out from the library and I found myself going through them, and they're reference books, so you can jump around from one section to another, and a couple of things that I was looking for specifically applied to a project I was working on, and the rest of it was just interesting information. One of the things I really enjoy in reference books is seeing different ways to do things. Like, there are so many ways to cast on and cast off a knitting project, just as one example. And understanding the why behind using a certain technique is really cool. It's just like that next layer down in our making. So I had these books for a while. Our library has a great system where now they don't really have the concept of overdue books. You can keep things for quite a while unless somebody has them on hold, and they just keep automatically renewing. Until after some time, they'll kind of nudge you and say, are you planning to keep this book? Because if so, this is how much it costs. So after having them for a while, I recognized that these are the kind of books I would like to have on my shelf. So I found some used copies online. The first one is the Knitwear Design Workshop, a comprehensive guide to hand knits by Shirley Payton, if I'm saying that right. So the back of the book says, design stunning knitwear for a perfect individual fit. And a couple of the bullet points: how to identify the right yarn for particular garment design, lessons on how to design double tapered, single tapered, reverse tapered garments with sleeves and or sleeve caps that fit, how to best use a stitch pattern to achieve a finished look, and so on and so on. And I flipped through this book, and first of all, some of the example styles in here, though they might be a bit dated, based on when the book was published, I would say that a lot of them have pretty classic shapes and silhouettes. These are all tailored for so-called women's patterns, accounting for bust and waist shaping in some of them. But the techniques behind them and things like the schematics that show you different sleeve and body options, just give you a glimpse there without giving too much away. All the different combinations of ways that you can piece together a garment are really interesting to me. And knowing me, I may start with something more simple just so that I can apply the concepts, understand measurements, and how different pieces of the garment relate to each other. But this is definitely a keep on the shelf kind of book. I even like the fact that it goes into things like the effect of stitch patterns, because that to me feels like giving me a canvas to start with for a sweater shape, and then the stitch pattern just takes it up to that next level of customization to make it exactly what I'm after. The second book is one that my friend Denise and I geeked out a little bit on. It's the Principles of Knitting book. Have you seen this one? It's a monster. It's pretty thick. The Principles of Knitting, Methods and Techniques of Hand Knitting by June Hemmons Hyatt. This is a completely revised and updated version. The back of the book says, "The Definitive Book of Knitting Techniques. A word-of-mouth phenomenon since the original publication, with a passionate and loyal following. The Principles of Knitting has served as a treasured resource for an entire generation of knitters. Now completely revised and updated, this long-awaited new edition contains indispensable information for every knitter, from the beginner to the most experienced, on all aspects of the craft." That's my idea of a reference book. So, as you would expect, it covers everything. Cast on to bind off, pattern design, everything in between. Yarns, yarn types. I'm flipping through, you can't really get an appreciation for it, but there's just a lot of illustration and information in here. And I feel like this is a book I will use for years and years. Both of these books support this kind of constant back of my mind nudge for my creativity, which is to continue learning and exploring and experimenting to keep myself interested in this craft. I've discovered a couple of things this year. One is I am becoming more and more of a natural fiber diehard. As far as my stash is concerned, I haven't added very much to my stash, but I have been curating it, and I have been very selective in what I'm using in my projects. And natural fibers, specifically animal fibers, wool and its cousins, is becoming even nearer and dearer to my heart. I am also noticing trends in my knitting more towards, as I said earlier in the podcast, neutral shades. And I think that part of that has to do with things that I want to wear often. So things that don't need a special occasion or a particular, outfit to be put together for me to wear them. I'm really leaning into that. On the design side of the house, as a pattern designer, I really want to lean into upping my skill. And part of that is the more I know about what options exist for things, the easier I can let my creativity flow, so I can execute on an idea with different options and use the one that fits my idea the best. But that takes some study, it takes some resources, it takes time, and I have those things. So, and I have the option to embrace that, and so I am. And I think I'm also trying to put behind me some of the fear or hesitation that I may have around diving into more complex techniques. There are times when I just want my knitting to be very simple, and it's just about the motion of my hands and the movement of the material through my fingers, and that's what fits. And then there are times where I want my brain to be engaged, or I want the satisfaction of trying something difficult and succeeding. So these books are just a representation of a point in time in this journey. And I'm really glad to have been able to get used copies of them shipped right to my house and give the library back their copies finally so that someone else can benefit from them too. Share with me if you are feeling any kind of change in the season of your making. Are you shifting from one thing to another? Are you returning to something that you were once really into? I'd love to hear about that. I think that all of our journeys contain seasons, and I'm acknowledging mine more as a way of appreciating them. I'm grateful for you and all the excuses we have to connect with each other and communicate about this thing that we enjoy. That's it for this time around. I look forward to coming back again very soon. I thank you so much for this space, and I'll see you again next time.